Right. Welcome, everyone, to the HAI Weekly Research Seminar. Again, I'm Vanessa Parley. I manage the research programs here at HAI, and I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today, Solana Larsen. Solana is editor of the Internet Health Report that's published by Mozilla. And in 2022, that report focused on artificial intelligence. At Mozilla, Solana is a member of the Insights team, which is a unit that researches and develops recommendations on trustworthy AI and internet health. And today's seminar, Solana will be discussing some of the key findings from that 2022 Internet Health Report on AI. If you all haven't seen it, it is quite interesting. It's in podcast format, so it's a little bit different than the usual written reports, which makes it easy listening. So before we begin, a few logistics. For those of you on Zoom, you can use the Zoom chat to message the group, but ask questions through the Slido app. The link will be in the chat shortly. And I will choose questions from Slido after the presentation. Slido has the nice upvote feature so that I can tell what questions all of you online are most interested in. And then I will be splitting the Q&A between online and in person. So those of you in person will also have the opportunity to ask questions. All right, I think that is it. I will hand it over to Solana. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm really happy, of course, for the online audience, but I'm excited about the real life audience. I haven't spoken in front of people since before the pandemic, and I think you might even laugh at my jokes, or it's just really nice to have reactions in the room. And before we went live, we had a chance to hear introductions from a lot of you, and so people in the room work in tech, study tech, are approaching this topic from a lot of different perspectives. I hear the microphone is kind of cutting in and out. I don't know. Should we? Let's try with this one with loud instead. Can you help me? Okay. So folks are approaching this topic from a lot of different perspectives, and I hope that we can have a bit of a conversation about, your ideas on this topic, because I'm also here to learn. Who should have power over AI? That's the big question that I'm bringing to the table, and power can be pretty invisible in the realm of technology. And part of what we want to do at Mozilla is highlight what can be gained by expanding access to power, or indeed shifting power to more people and communities, and not least the people who are harmed or at risk from AI systems in different contexts. So I'm going to be sharing some data visuals with you from the Internet Health Report, and then also be telling you a little bit about the podcast that we created, which is sort of forms the main body of the report. This podcast is called IRL, Online Life is Real Life. And if you're somebody who likes to multitask while you're listening to talks online or in person, you can go ahead and subscribe to it, follow it. We took this approach with the podcast in order to make the topic more engaging, but also to be able to directly hand the microphone literally to people who are doing inspiring work on AI around the world, either to build things or create policies or question systems of power and technology. So I encourage you to listen to it afterwards. I'll be sharing a couple of examples from the podcast, but there's really no substitute for hearing voices and accents and people around the world in their own words. And I should also say, in case you don't know Mozilla, it's the nonprofit organization behind Firefox, an internet browser that competes with Chrome, Safari, and others in a marketplace that is especially dominated by Google and big tech. And unlike Apple, to put it flippantly, who sell devices, or Google, who are after data to sell ads, Mozilla's core purpose is to make the internet healthier. And we're guided by a manifesto. So our mission is not centered on profit. And Firefox has been able to compete over the years because of open source code contributions from thousands and thousands of people all over the world. And so a big audience, indeed a community for Mozilla, is technology developers. And part of our mission is to make sure not just that people have access to the internet through browsers and other technologies, um, but that also that people have the ability to build and shape technology themselves. So that's part of our ethos and our mission. And as an organization and a company, we do a lot of things that I won't be able to cover here in detail. We work on tech policy, we work on research, we do activism, we mobilize consumers, we fund fellowships. And in the coming years, we're also going to be investing millions of dollars in responsible tech startups. So my role at the Mozilla Foundation is on the insights team. And over the past 5-6 years, we've created this annual Internet Health Report. And it's about how do we make the internet healthier as an ecosystem worldwide? How can it be something that's good for people? And the focus changes from year to year, just as the global conversation about the internet also changes from year to year. Um, But every single time, it always builds on input from a lot of practitioners. And it always involves a research compilation that brings together a lot of research from different disciplines. These are really big questions that require a lot of different people to contribute from I think, from different sides, from different angles. Over the past years, we've shifted our focus to AI, both for the report and for the Mozilla Foundation as a whole, because this is where the internet is really expanding most rapidly, and I think arguably has the greatest consequence for humanity. And I think you would agree that we're at an inflection point right now where AI is being really actively studied and questioned. And I think that we should all of us be really intentional about who we seek answers from, to questions about how technology can best serve people, or as we say at Mozilla, how it can serve people over profits. So let me give you something else to look at here. This data visual we put on the homepage of the Internet Health Report for 2022. And it's a great starting point, I think, for discussing power and influence over AI in the way that we're conceptualizing it. And it shows a distorted map of the world that highlights how data sets originating in the global north are being used for performance benchmarking and AI research papers over 5 years. And it's based on a fantastic paper by a group of researchers, Bernard Koch, Emily Denton, Alex Hanna, and Jacob G. Foster. And this is just one sort of indicator for the kind of disparities that exist in AI development. And what you should take away from it is that it's the same data sets from just a few countries that are used most often to evaluate the performance of machine learning models everywhere. This doesn't mean that data sets or machine learning models aren't being developed in the rest of the world, because they are, but the discourse, the conversation about how AI should be used, who should benefit from it, and what it means for it to be effective is currently really heavily weighted towards people and institutions who already have tremendous power over the internet and the world. So, in fact, more than half of the data sets that are used for this AI performance benchmarking across 26,000 plus research papers were from just 12 elite institutions and tech companies in the United States, Germany, and in Hong Kong. And you can see Stanford University, where we are today, is right up at the top of the list. Here's another visual. This one actually comes from the Stanford HAI Center itself, from their Artificial Intelligence Index report. And it's a pretty visual that we created based on their numbers, stacked dollar bills based on how far ahead different countries are when it comes to private investments in AI. And again, it doesn't mean that AI isn't being developed all around the world, but it helps show that the companies with the resources to invest in this technology are carving out competitive advantages, and that the countries with access to engineers and large amounts of data and computational power are consolidating their dominance of software and of hardware in ways that really impact how AI is being developed and deployed worldwide. So we can be certain basically that neither the benefits nor the harms of AI are going to be evenly distributed around the world. And part of what we do with this year's report is highlight sort of the intersections of internet health with AI. That's something that we're really interested in, and it builds on the years of work that we've been doing and explaining why it's so important for the internet to be healthy. And as an organization that has worked to build a better web, it's really painful actually to see how often the worst parts of the internet are amplified in AI. And the example that we use here, for instance, is how many of the most popular data sets, the ones that are used for performance benchmarking and so forth, are made up of content that's scraped from the internet, which still overwhelmingly reflects words and images that skew English, American, white, and certainly when it comes to female representation, is content that's created for the male gaze. So it isn't surprising, at least to me, that the machine learning models that are most credited for advancing the field of automated language generation frequently reproduce racist and sexist stereotypes, and that it's in large part due to their training data. Another intersection with the internet and internet health and how power is distributed is, in the large tech companies, who to me seem to be the ones that stand to gain the most from AI around the world. And so each of these companies make money in different ways. This is an overview of the annual revenue of different big tech companies, and it shows how, at least until 2021, how the revenue was growing higher and higher. And I think what we wanted to say with this is that AI is core to the business operations of all of them. They work on a lot of different things, obviously, but AI is really core to them in different ways. And to use an example, we took here the Amazon revenue report for 2021, and we showed their revenue categories. And these are their revenue categories, not ours. And for each of these categories, and if you're online, you can click on it and read the descriptions. Each of these categories have AI as a really central aspect of how they make money and how they run their business. You have the online advertising, which is automated. You have recommendation engines in their online stores. And then, of course, you have that big square with 62.2 billion in revenue for cloud computing. And there's a similar dynamic at play with a lot of the big tech companies who are using AI to increase their power and dominance and bottom line. And even though I think, as consumers also, we're coming more closely in contact with AI via our connections with big tech, be it social media or search engines and so forth. These companies aren't very transparent about how they use AI or how they protect us as human beings in contact with these technologies. And there are a lot of research studies on this. The one that we show here is based on the Corporate Accountability Report of Ranking Digital Rights that ranks tech companies and phone companies on their human rights and privacy and indeed algorithmic transparency in different ways. And what you need to take away from this one is that most companies score really low on these scales. And because these big tech companies aren't very transparent about AI, researchers often need to recruit the users themselves to get data donations to be able to study platforms and seek answers themselves. So because there's a lack of transparency or lack of collaboration between big tech and researchers in different parts of the world, a new movement has started to sort of figure out how to gather this data, gather this information independently of the companies, or sometimes in direct opposition to what the companies would like you to do. And this data visual here is based on a study that Mozilla did, where we gathered information from people who downloaded a browser add-on to contribute to this research study, where they can browse YouTube, and if they land on a video that they somehow regret seeing, they can send the data to Mozilla, and we can analyze what was the user journey that they took to get there, what was the path that was shown to them. And it's just one example of a research project to sort of reverse engineer how a recommendation engine works. And in this study, it's based on more than 3,000 videos that people sent to us. We were able to see that over 70% of the videos that people themselves said that they regretted viewing because it had questionable content came to them from recommendations by the platforms themselves. So there's a lot to learn and a lot that could be gained from more collaboration on studies like these. So we know that platforms use AI to make their platforms safer, for instance, to moderate content. But we also know that the resourcing for it, that the labeling of content by moderators isn't done equally for all languages. And this is even though the large majority of users of these large internet platforms tend to live outside of the US. And here you have the statistics of Facebook users in different parts of the world, and you can see how 90% of Facebook's users live in other countries, and that actually their largest user base, the majority of them live in India, not in the United States, as you might imagine. And this is a dynamic that you see also with Twitter and other big companies, where I think the users that they're most beholden to, or the regulators that they pay most attention to, aren't necessarily where they have the most users, or where you have the people that are most impacted by the harms that do happen. And I think what we need to think about here is that in real life, over and over, the harms of AI, they disproportionately affect people who are not advantaged by global systems of power, not just in this context, but in others as well. And we see that in news headlines about algorithmic biases. I think, we have so many glaring signals of how technology can be used to oppress rather than uplift people. We know that digital ads, social media networks, that they're weaponized to spread disinformation. We know that there's a global industry of companies and organizations that are engaged in covert messaging. And yet the transparency and collaboration with researchers isn't really prioritized by companies to a degree that's, I think, on par with the harms. It's a good place to think about how to address this, how to get practical about changing things and thinking about how we shift the conversation, is potentially to consider what values are advanced by AI research, and especially AI research that's really influential. And frequently today, the values that are embedded are commercial values. This data visual is based on a really great paper with multiple authors. It's called The Values Encoded in Machine Learning Research, and it's from 2021. And it shows the corporate affiliations of authors of the 100 most highly cited papers from 2 major AI conferences. And it shows how the corporate influence has grown from 2008 to 2019. In case you had any doubt who's funding, who's benefiting from a lot of the AI research that is most highly regarded. And this is another visual based on the same set of research. And it shows that in these 100 most highly cited papers, although ethical considerations in the research field by some metrics are on the rise, these papers, these 100 papers, the vast majority of them are centered purely on technical performance. They're not about social needs or risks, and they don't really discuss ethical principles or user rights. And these are some of the things that you can imagine could shift the conversation. Or maybe, if you work on these types of issues, as we do, I think I was surprised to see that it doesn't feature higher given what we know about AI today. So the barriers and the costs for building AI are lower, thanks in part to a new generation of open source tools. But many of the same harms of big tech and big data are going to be repeated if we don't invest in more research and invest in people who take alternative approaches. And regulation is something that we believe can help set the guardrails for innovation in ways that diminish harm and enforce data privacy, user rights, and accountability. But it's still a really nascent policy field in most countries or regions. And this visual is one that if you go to the website later, you can also click around on it and see different types of regulation, like categories of regulation that are being tried and tested in different parts of the world. But I think it's important to mention it as part of the puzzle of figuring out how to make AI more trustworthy. So how do we build trustworthy AI? This is there's no easy answer to this question, and this is like the big overarching question for a lot of Mozilla's work and investments at the moment. There's so much interesting work happening on privacy preservation, on data nutrition labels, how to operationalize ethics, how to audit algorithms, how to give users more power. And I think we just need more and more and more of this. But I think we also need to think of innovation in relation to power. It's a good, I think, a useful tool to start to work through some of these issues. So who benefits from the technologies that are created? Who has power over them? And who should have power over them? And in our podcast, we answer this question by talking to people who are building things for their own communities. And I think it really helps highlight both the problems for them of how things are typically done, but then also what can be gained by trying different alternative approaches to building AI. And so I think for me as a communicator, that's been part of the challenge, is figuring out how do you tell the story of an individual developer in a way that makes it clear that it should be an inspiration. How can you show a small project and make clear that it can be a prototype for a change or a development that you would like to see in technology on a broader scale? And I can share just a couple of examples here. I really wish I could have brought everybody in the podcast with me today. Each episode has 3 or 4 people from different parts of the world who are building or working on something that is inspiring. And in this episode, the AI Medicine Cabinet, which is about AI and how it can be used for health purposes, we talked to Avery Smith, who's on the photo there, whose wife passed away of skin cancer. And he's a developer himself, and he realized firsthand through this experience how racial disparity in healthcare in the United States, and particularly for dermatology, impacted how his wife's cancer was misdiagnosed. And he was later dismayed that the data sets for the diagnostic tools that are developed by by big tech healthcare initiatives don't contain almost any images of Black people, and how the researchers that were presenting data sets and research about skin diagnostic tools would skate over this fact and almost wouldn't talk about it. He wrote a research paper himself. He's working on a data set of individually donated photos that show different kinds of skin maladies on Black skin. And his company is called Melalogic, and its purpose is to increase access to quality dermatological healthcare for Black people. And I think it's really an example of somebody who has a personal story, a challenge, and the technical skills to try and attack the problem, try and propose an alternative and work together with others to try and present a solution to an injustice, actually, and an inequity in how we talk about these technologies and how we, you know, highlight them as solutions to things when maybe they aren't. The other person who's on the photo here is Radhakrishnan, who is in India and calls herself a feminist technoscience researcher. She did a fascinating research project where she traveled around in rural India, looking at how AI diagnostic systems were being rolled out in rural communities in India to try and address shortages of doctors in healthcare. And the questions she asks are around consent. And she puts a big question mark at whether people really had an opportunity to even consent when they weren't usually asked, or they were asked in languages that they didn't understand, and when they didn't have any other alternative for healthcare than using these AI systems. And so you have multinational companies that are rolling out systems in rural regions who are gathering data, using it to train their own systems, and being able to make money off of this data that they've gathered from poor people in different parts of the world. And what she's saying is what people really need are doctors. So why is the government investing or prioritizing in these AI systems? And it's interesting to hear her explain it in her own words. The other person who isn't on the photo, but who is also mentioned in this episode, is a researcher named Remy Muhire, and he's based in Rwanda. And he, over several years, helped develop a voice recognition system for one of the major languages in Rwanda. And at the height of the COVID pandemic, helped make a chatbot that you can speak with that would give you information on where to get COVID vaccines, different COVID rates, that was used by more than 2 million people. It was developed in partnership with the local health authorities in Rwanda. And the reason, or the way that they were able to make this tool, which is accessible to people who only have a phone and who might not be able to read or write, but can then speak to the system, is because he worked a long time gathering voice data from people in Rwanda, from students, from different people who are involved as volunteers in creating this open source voice technology, actually using a system called Common Voice that Mozilla helps work on as well. But yeah, I think it's an example of a health technology that is developed outside of the realm of big tech. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in what the big companies are doing that we forget that really powerful and important things can also be developed by smaller outfits, individuals, communities, groups of people working together who know what is needed and are able to act fast when they have the skills and support to do so. This other episode, and there's 5 episodes in total, I'm not going to go through all of them, don't worry. But this one episode, AI from Above, I think is a really beautiful one as well. We talked to Risecha Safala, who's a researcher who is working together with the DARE Institute that Timnit Gebru helped found. And she grew up in a township in South Africa herself, and she was interested in investigating the resource allocations, the difference in resource allocations between townships and suburbs, wondering basically why are hospitals and schools and different public services so um, bad in townships compared to suburbs. And when she set out to investigate this, she assumed she would be able to find the information, but she realized that the South African government wasn't gathering data, or they had no maps that delineated where townships begin and end, that they had only they had sort of erased the existence of townships from the official government data because they had only either residential or non-residential. Um, and what she wanted to do was to make the townships visible using community input and AI to map for the entire country, because you could from above see characteristics of what townships look like, be able to make a map and then pair it with other things to begin to study the injustice of what she calls spatial apartheid that continues today. And I think that's also, again, a really important example of somebody who's using AI to correct an injustice, building something that is core to what they stand for and what their community needs, and built with really really strong social justice principles in mind. One of the things she goes into in the interview, she also talks about the risks of this kind of mapping of where poverty exists and how it could be abused depending on who had access to it. A data set like that can be very powerful if you're a housing justice organization, or but if it's in the hand of an insurance company or in the hands of somebody who wants to harm a specific demographic, how does it transform? How does it, what are these things that we need to think about? And the other person who you see a picture of here is Michael Runningwolf, who's the founder of a community called Indigenous in AI, and he's an AI developer himself as well. And here he talks a lot about, the importance of community sovereignty over data and AI technologies, and particularly of, AI technologies that would never get built if Indigenous people themselves weren't building them, because nobody else has an interest in seeing these technologies being built. And the things that he was talking about range from technologies for language preservation, but also even things like VR experiences and AR experiences of landscape, and how you can use it to educate young people about the history of where they come from, and how you can use it as a storytelling tool that integrates with the local environment. But he also talked about how the impulse to do open data and public data sometimes is at odds with the interests of an Indigenous community, where you might want to keep some of that information inside the community, and not necessarily open up information about natural resources or Indigenous medicinal plants to the greater to the whole world, because of the risk of exploitation. So those are just all some few examples. I encourage you to listen to the podcast if you're interested in this kind of stories. And I'm really curious to hear what comes to mind for you when you think about power in AI. Who are the types of people that you would like to hear more from? And does it even occur to you? I mean, I think in this process, in making this podcast and in thinking about these questions, I think who do we normally listen to when we think about AI? Who normally is the authority or the expert when we have questions on this? Who gets interviewed in the media? who gets the research funding for large research projects, and what would it be if things were different, if we had more input from alternative voices on these topics and on these issues, and what other kinds of amazing technologies might be built. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. That was great. We do have some questions online. I'm sure you all have questions. But I thought we could start with if anybody from the audience has thoughts on Solana's last question about are there voices that you all would be interested in hearing from but have not had the opportunity or have not found anybody doing that work and hearing from those people. Anybody have thoughts? If not, we can go to questions.
So one question in the back.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. We can't hear you online if you don't have the microphone.
I was just saying, in response to that question, I think a lot about young people as a voice that's left out of this conversation, particularly thinking about the ways that AI is shaping education and how teachers and researchers and reporters are talking a lot about it. But I think students aren't seen as responsible enough to even be invited to the ethical conversation. And I think that's a grave disservice, particularly for the ones who it might make the most positive or negative impact.
Thank you.
There's another comment in the front.
Hi, my name is Fatima. I was really moved by this presentation and I loved centering the community. As an organizer, someone that's Latina, queer, disabled, all of the voices from marginalized communities are needed, especially when we think of low-income communities as well. I think that that's missing, and to see more people that are representative of folks like myself, also thinking of undocumented people and people that are affected by this. I was very moved by a lot of the topics, and I'm so grateful that you're here and having this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think maybe part of what's moving about it is that it doesn't happen very often, I think, in these spaces. And then it makes you think about everyone who is left out most of the time. At least that's how it feels for me when I see, a tech podcast like this that, doesn't have big names from big companies as like the center point. And the other thing that I've been saying a lot when I talk about this work, and in general, I think the question of how do you open up the conversation of how to make AI trustworthy is that I may not be an AI developer or an AI expert, but if your system is harming me, then I know something about it than that you do not. Even if you created it or you built it, it means that I am actually an authority about an aspect of that system that you may not fully recognize or even appreciate. And that's something that I think people, that we all need to get better at opening up this conversation about tech and AI to more than people who just build tech or understand how the tech works, because it affects so many more people and societies. And, indeed, like things that are developed here in California, like the way that they affect people who live all over the world, that's really difficult for any one person or company to be able to oversee at once, right? The only option is for us to be better at collaborating and speaking more openly and with more different types of people and professions on these topics.
All right. I'm going to go to a question online. This was our most upvoted question from Jim Salzman. Mozilla's Common Voice data set for speech to text avoids authentic intelligibility. Why not set an example?
Authentic intelligibility? I don't understand that.
Yeah, he mentions thumbs up, thumbs down is easier than transcription.
I don't
May you
understand
refer?
the question.
Okay. All right. We'll move on to the next online.
I wish I did understand the question, though.
If
That's what
Jim-
I want to say.
if you're online and want to reply in Slido with a clarification, then I can relook at this question.
What I can say, the Common Voice project is very interesting. It's a web interface with a microphone, basically, and it gives you a short string of text, and you can read it out loud, and you can donate your voice. A recording of your voice in order to help develop voice recognition. And the way that we've created it and the mission behind it was to get more women, to get more people of color, to make sure that voice recognition systems recognize a wider range of voices, and also to remove the monopoly of really big companies on voice technology systems. And so you have languages around the world, minority languages, or just huge languages that aren't a business priority for big tech companies who don't have voice recognition systems in their language. And so to create a system where tech communities or language communities could come together and create their own voice recognition systems, that's what is done. And there's now a data set, it's all public, of more than 90 languages now, that creates this resource that then can be used by others to build tech. So it's part of bringing this open source ethos, like the good parts of it, to this new era of technology, and hopefully more accessibility.
All right. Yes.
Thank you so much for this talk. Ooh, too loud. I was listening to it on my way in this morning. So I work here at HI. I'm our privacy and data policy fellow. And I was, of course, very interested in the piece of your talk where you were talking about data sets, which I think is a really key piece. And a little bit of what you just discussed now, I think, answers part of the question I had, which is, how do we get away from, maybe we'll call it data set monopoly, and moving away towards, the broad scraping of the internet as the key source for most of how we train these systems and supply the data. Because like many of the points you made in the presentation, I'm on the exact same page. We're reproducing a lot of societal biases by just scraping whatever's out there. We're also dealing with a lot of what I call the toxic waste, a lot of really bad content. And Common Voices, I think, is a good example of an intentional data set, but obviously we need a lot of them. And so I'm just curious if Mozilla has been working at all on trying to think about other ways to build up that sector. Thank you.
Yeah. I think you could answer this question as well as I could, probably better. It's about the intentionality in the data set and creating things that are specifically for a purpose. Similar to with the example with the medical, what a quote from Avery, that I would have loved to play it for you, but part of what Avery was saying was that when he reached out to the people who had built this huge data set of skin images for medical diagnosis, he said, do you have any images of Black people? And they said, well, no, not really. And he said, but why don't you say that? And they said, well, it's not for Black people, it's for everybody. And then what he says is that response made him understand that they said it's for everybody, but it means that it's not for Black people. And so that's why he went and set about creating something that was specifically for Black people. So sometimes I think it's also, there's no necessarily a problem with that system because it worked well for what it was good at. But there's this hubris or this unwillingness to simply just be clear about what it can and can't do. And if people were better at saying what a system couldn't do and just being open about that, we'd already solve a huge part of the problem, I think, because so much of it is false advertising for what these systems can do. And we see that repeatedly, even now in this excitement over ChatGPT-3, there's a lot of excitement about what it can do and a lot of willingness to shut the eyes of what it can't do or what it could do wrong, because people want to be excited, right, about the new technology. So yeah, Mozilla is definitely going to be working a lot on, I think, also investing in alternatives and figuring out how can we support alternative kinds of research, different types of data set development. But I think, me personally, I think that's really where we need to focus, creating the raw materials for more people to be doing things that need to be done.
All right, we'll do another from online. So this one is referencing your slide that shows how the top papers are mostly around technical performance, and very few around kind of ethics and user rights. Do you or is Mozilla working on any ideas on how to reverse this or bring some of the ethics work into the top?
Not directly. I mean, one of the people who was involved with this study is now a fellow at Mozilla, Abiba Birhane. So I guess there are different ways to support the research community, and part of it is, I think, for organizations like Mozilla or for Stanford High or others who are philosophically aligned, is to elevate these voices and give credence to them, and also support researchers like this when they get backlash, because this type of thing is really controversial in some circles. And when you're pointing out racism, you're pointing out sexism, you're pointing out different types of inequities in people's work, especially in AI communities, the backlash can be really fierce. It's not easy to be the one who is calling out these things, particularly if you're a researcher, women of color, not well resourced, not backed by a giant company. So how can those of us who see the value in what they're saying or the topics that they're raising, how can we help them grow stronger? And I don't just mean by money, but also by lending credibility and backing them up.
Good. And then I did want to mention too, at HAI, all of our funded research has to include an ethics statement. So our goal there is to start including some of the ethics into these technical methodologies and papers too. So
yeah.
All right. Any other questions from the audience, the live audience?
Yeah, this might sorry. This might come off as a somewhat strange question, but the terminology internet health report that you work on points to some sort of organic metaphor of the internet as something that can be healthy and unhealthy. And I was wondering whether you'd have a metaphor, another organic metaphor that would continue this trend in regards AI use and misuse. So considering the internet as an organic body, what is the role of AI?
Yeah. We actually took the approach with internet health as a term. It's like ecosystem health rather than human health. And so thinking about an ecosystem that is never, like, there's never a perfect balance, like it adapts to our behavior, but it's moving, it's alive, it's in motion. Like, those are the kinds of things that we wanted to evoke in using that term. But also that you can make it better, like even with human health, like, you can do things to make yourself healthier, but you're never going to be in perfect health. And you're never going to just like reach there and be done. You have to keep working at it all the time. So I think in terms of AI, we haven't found the right equivalent necessarily for that kind of poetic metaphor. What we've decided to use at Mozilla for now is trustworthy AI. But I think even the term AI for a lot of people is going out of style because it's so, as an umbrella term, it's not satisfying, it's not accurate. people object even to the word intelligence or artificial in this context. Machine learning would be probably more accurate. So yeah, there's a lot of critique about even the term artificial intelligence. And I think, at this inflection point where we're really talking a lot and questioning these computer systems and data systems, I think the language is going to evolve too very soon.
Hey, so I really appreciate your framing of this whole presentation of kind of power and control and effects on society. And I think one of the spaces that this is most important is in the security domain. We see a lot of militaries around the world are increasingly wanting to incorporate artificial intelligence systems into their operations to solve innumerable problems. So I'm wondering if Mozilla is doing any work in this space. You're doing work in a lot of other spaces, or if you have any reflections on that relationship as well. Thanks.
It's a big question. It's something me personally I worry about a lot, both in terms of privacy. Privacy is a big issue for Mozilla, and I think that it goes hand in hand with the type of surveillance and authoritarianism and I think violence associated with technologies, whether it be military or police violence. There are countless examples around the world. One of the podcast episodes that we have looks at you as an individual researcher or a technology developer. Where do you set the limits for what you're willing to work on? And I think it's a tall order for people who work in tech to change an entire global multinational company's, mission. But I think from an individual perspective, asking questions of, when you see something, do you say something? What does it mean to be a whistleblower? What does it mean to, if you see a research paper that's about how to do genetic surveillance of minority population in a country, who do you get that paper retracted? Who do you complain to? What areas can you fight in, whatever your profession or your expertise is? So I think that's one way to approach it. But I do think that part of what ought to be discussed is the way that large technology companies do, reinforce systems of power of the kind that you're talking about as well, and go hand in hand with them. To me, that's something that is uncomfortable. But
all right. So we have a few more minutes. I wanted to end with something that you and I were talking about before the seminar started, around kind of the communities and activists working with the communities and Mozilla's interactions and how you all work with them, kind of what you've learned, any challenges you faced.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody looking to get more involved in community work or working with communities, this isn't just something that you can dip in and out of. I think you have to build trust with communities over time. And part of what I was saying is how do you support researchers? How do you show that you're there for them beyond a fellowship or beyond a grant? How can you support their work and show that you value their engagements with their community? And yeah, how do you communicate with your own community over time? I think nobody does this perfectly. Mozilla doesn't do it perfectly, but we try, and we're involved in a lot of things. One thing we do every year is we have this big festival. It's called MozFest, and it's organized by a community of people. So we don't actually organize the program ourselves. We have a really large community of volunteers who puts it together. And it's a really interesting experiment, I think, in how do you allow grassroots priorities to rise within an organization that, it is well funded and comes at it from a different angle. What are the areas where you can share power with your community? And it doesn't necessarily mean that, they do your annual planning for you, but what are the spaces within the work that you do where you can actually give power to people who you think should have a seat at the table? And those are the things that people see. And I think where you get tested on your honesty and your commitment to that sharing. And it's uncomfortable because you might get pushed to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do yourself, or that maybe, isn't the priority for your funders or sponsors or so forth. So I think that's something that through a long history, like more than 20 years of open source development, you do learn some things about how do you collaborate in public to, actually build and create something that's usable with lots of different people. And that is something that the internet is really good at. I mean, I said a lot of negative things about the internet, but it does enable us to bring people together and actually create incredible things with people we've never even met. But yeah, I think.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, so that's about all of the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, all of you, for coming in person, and thank you to our online audience. Next week, we have Stanford faculty member Jeff Cares speaking on sustainability and AI related issues. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you.